Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make Greek Easter bread. It's also known as Tsoureki. Now you're going to start by adding 2 cups of flour to a bowl. Add all of the yeast and a half a cup of sugar. Give that a quick stir just to incorporate the ingredients, and then add all of the warm milk. Mix that up real well to get all the lumps out. It's going to have the consistency of pancake batter. Then cover that with either a tea towel or plastic wrap and let it sit at room temperature for about an hour. This is called a sponge, and it's going to develop extra flavor to the bread and give the yeast a jump start. And this is what the sponge looks like when it's finished developing. You'll see that it doubles in size. While the sponge develops, grind the Mahlab. This spice is unique to Greek Easter bread and gives it a fruity, nutty flavor. It's best to purchase Mahlab whole and grind it yourself because it can get rancid pretty quickly after you grind it. We are also adding orange and lemon zest to the bread. I like using a microplane to get really fine pieces of zest because it will distribute throughout the dough better. If you use a zester that gives you large chunks, then I recommend chopping them even finer with a chef's knife. Now we're going to get back to the sponge. Pour the melted butter over the sponge, then whisk the eggs up and add that to the batter. Give the batter a good stir. Now, if you want to use a stand mixer for this bread, you certainly can do that. This makes a large batch, so you'll need to have at least a 4.5 to 5 quart capacity mixer. Pour about 5 cups of flour over the batter. I'm just guesstimating here. You don't have to be real precise. It's more about adding the flour in batches. Add the salt, the rest of the sugar, the Mahlab spice that you ground up earlier, and the lemon and orange zest. Stir that until it is blended well. This is where a stand mixer comes in handy if you have one that is large enough. Otherwise, use a stiff spatula like I'm using here and scrape the sides of the bowl frequently. You want to mix it until the flour gets incorporated. Now, slowly add the rest of the flour. I'm going to add the flour to the bowl and stir it by hand to start with. Eventually the dough will get too stiff to stir, and when that happens, just dump the dough out onto the counter and knead the rest of the flour in by hand. This is a pretty sticky dough and it can get messy. A bench scraper works great, and it helps you scrape up the dough and the flour on the counter and just helps the whole process be a little less messy, but I have some more tricks. After you knead the dough for a little while, it will start to get a little easier to work with, but it will still be sticky. Don't add any extra flour or the bread will end up dense. Instead, the best tip I have for working with sticky dough is to use a bit of oil on your hands and on the counter. If you're concerned about getting a grease stain on the counter, then you can always use water instead. As long as you keep your hands and the countertop lightly greased or slightly damp, then the dough will not stick. Knead the dough for at least 10 minutes, then transfer it to a greased bowl. Flip the dough in the bowl so it gets oil on top as well, then cover the bowl with a towel or plastic wrap. Let it rise for an hour and a half to 2 hours until it doubles in size, then tip the dough out onto the counter. Divide the dough into 6 equal portions. This recipe makes enough for 2 braided loaves, so you'll need 3 portions for each loaf. Roll each section of dough into a rope about 15 inches long. If the dough starts to resist being shaped, then set it aside to rest a bit while you roll another section. After the dough rests, it'll be easier to shape. Lay 3 ropes next to each other and roll the ends between your hands so they're tapered or slightly thinner on each end. Pinch the ropes together on one end and braid them just like you would braid hair. Once you get to the end, tuck the ends under the loaf and transfer it to a baking sheet. Cover the loaves of bread and let them rise for about an hour. Tuck a hard-boiled egg into each end of the loaf. If you want to stick to tradition, dye the eggs red. The hard-boiled eggs get dyed red to symbolize the blood of Christ, and the egg itself is a symbol of renewal and rebirth. The 3-stranded braid represents the Holy Trinity. Next, we're going to put an egg wash on the bread. This egg wash will give it a shiny coat, and that represents the light of Christ. The red dye on the eggs will bleed out a bit on the bread as it bakes. If that's a problem for you, then you can decorate the bread with red eggs after it bakes. If you want to do that, just stick a ball of tin foil in the bread to hold the spot for the eggs. Now sprinkle the tops with slivered almonds and pop the bread into the oven to bake. Thanks for watching. You can find the full written recipe in the description below. Be sure to subscribe and follow us for more recipes.